Be a demo here of how to set up Active Directory integration on a Linux machine. So I'm going to use Ubuntu 16.04 and my server is a Windows Server 2016. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a VM for doing this. So we can just call it Test Linux, or we'll call it AD Linux. How about that? Alright. And so I'm going to create this inside of my ProxMox virtual machine. Alright, Linux kernel. I'm going to mount whatever, there we go, Ubuntu 16.04 server, AMD 64 ISO. And then for the hard drive, I'm going to use the virtualized drivers because it's going to have better performance. And we'll go ahead and give it 64 gigs of RAM, which is more than sufficient since once this is finished, I'll probably just delete this. Write back has better performance, so we hit next. I'll give it 2 cores, change it to the host CPU, which will be better performance. On the memory, we'll just give it 2 gigs for now. A gig would be sufficient. And then for the network, I'm going to use the VirtIO, and I don't really care what IP address this gets, so I'm not going to bother DHCP staticking it. I'll let it get a random IP address. So I'm going to hit next and finish, and it's going to create my AD Linux. So now I can bring up the console on this, and I will go ahead and power it up. Now, installing Ubuntu is pretty basic. So if this part doesn't interest you, you can just fast forward through it, but it's pretty fast. Alright. Now when I do my Ubuntu installs, I'm going to pick no packages during the install except for OpenSSH, and everything else will install with apt. Now while I'm waiting on this to run, I can go ahead and show my domain controller here. So the domain controller is a Windows Server 2016 machine, and if I go ahead and go to the server management, tools, users and computers, we can see I have a Josh Jones user account, Kyle Stanley. I've got a couple of user accounts. So what I want is to have it to where I can log in on my Linux box with these user accounts. Alright, let's go back and check on the install. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to be using Samba and Winbind. So I'll go ahead and set the name of this to AD Linux and continue. I'm going to use the name Tech for my username, and then pick a password, and again, now this is actually when I set up like a mail server. This is how I set up the mail server, because I want all my mail servers to be Active Directory integrated, so I have single sign-on. And I'll go ahead and say guided, use the entire disk, and of course I want to set up LVM, that way I can resize the partitions or add other disks to it later if I wanted to. Alright, so we write the changes, tell it to use the full disk, and write it. So now on top of the LVM, because the LVM is a stack, it's got a PV, a VG, and an LV. It's like a layer of cakes. But on top, then it puts an actual ext4 file system. But the advantage of abstracting it like that is we could add other disks or other partitions. It makes it easy to regrow. You would use like a VG extend command so that you could extend your and then you could use resize 2fs to actually resize the file system. We do that pretty frequently. Recently I took a Linux I took over IT on a site that had a really old Ubuntu 10.04 mail server. And so the first thing we wanted to do was virtualize the physical server. So we used a VMware tool to convert it into a VM. And when it did, it converted a 2 terabyte disk down to just 175 gigs because that's what was being used. And once we got it into a VM, we had to re-extend it back. And since it was on top of LVM, it was pretty easy. The chimes are for emails I've got coming in on my other monitor. Okay. I said it should only take about 10 minutes to do just a basic Ubuntu install. Alright, no automatic updates. And then here's the part where the only part I'm going to choose is OpenSSH server. Everything else I would install later so I can control it. But I immediately want OpenSSH so that I can quit using the this ProxMox web console, which uses Spice. And I'd rather switch to something like PuTTY so that I can cut and paste commands. Now, I can't say for certain that this will work on Red Hat based distros because I pretty much use Debian based distros across the board. I use Debian, Ubuntu, Kali, but everything that I use is some sort of Debian based distro. But I imagine this or something similar to this should work pretty well on a Red Hat system as well. So I guess while this is installing, I guess I can talk a minute about the virtualization environment I'm using. So I use ProxMox. It's free, open source. Uses OpenVZ containers if you want for Linux, so it can share a kernel, or you can do a full-out KVM virtual machine that uses QEMU. You see up here we've got create VM, and this create CT is for create container. And this one here is one of my test nodes. It's a single ProxMox machine, and you'll notice I'm running a www server, which is a WordPress server that's housing 4 websites. I've got a server 2016 domain controller, I've got a Ubuntu mail server, and then this machine I'm spinning up now. And this is just some random junk i7 machine I had laying around. I think I put 32 gigs of RAM in it. You can pretty comfortably get 6 or more machines running on one of these. And I like them because you can cluster them, which would allow us, if we had a cluster, you could choose to migrate from one node to another. And anyways, I've also got it hooked into a NAS, so we can back up to the NAS. It does nightly backups to a NAS of all the VMs, and then if any of the backups fail, it emails me to let me know that one of them failed. I actually have a much larger ProxMox node that's running my more important stuff, but this is more of a test bed, development one where I'm playing around with stuff. And again, ProxMox is a Debian-based distro, so. Okay, so it's detecting that there's only one hard disk, so it's saying, do you want to write grub to the boot record of the main hard disk? So grub is the bootloader, so we're going to say yes. Prior to grub, there was Lilo. If anybody's been around messing with Linux long enough to remember Lilo. It stood for Linux Loader. Grub is much nicer. Okay, so installation is complete. We're going to reboot, and the priority level on the ProxMox VM by default is the hard drive first and CD second. So since the hard drive has an OS now, it's going to boot up off of the hard drive. So there's the grub bootloader, and we're going to boot up into Ubuntu. I'm using Ubuntu server, so I don't really care about a graphical interface. So I can log in here with the tech account, with the password that I set, and we're logged in. Now if I do ifconfig, I can see the IP address is 10.0.0.216. So what I would actually like to do is I'm going to create a PuTTY session. So let me pull over here, and we're going to create a PuTTY session. That's what I use for my SSH client to 10.0.0.216. Now, if this was any kind of server that I was going to use repeatedly, I would do a DHCP static in the router, and maybe in another video I'll show the router. I use pfSense at the moment, although I'm interested in checking out OpenSense. Alright, but we're going to log in as the tech account now. Alright, so now we're done with these others, so we can minimize those. Where my nice logo stays at the bottom. Actually, it's not the logo, the company name. Anyway, I'm going to immediately do sudo bash because I don't like working as anything other than root. Okay, so I've got my root prompt here. Now the first thing I want to do is install some packages. So I'm going to do an apt install. Alright, and now the packages that I'm going to want to install are going to be Samba, Samba client, I'm going to paste them in, Samba common, so those are the Samba pieces. Then we need Winbind, and the libnss, that's for the, if you're familiar with the etc ns switch file, that's how you determine what order to look for things, like if you're going to look for etc password or Winbind, or where you're going to look for authentication or host names. libpam, PAM is the pluggable authentication module. That's what allows Linux, all the different Linux applications to use authentication without hard coding for etc password and etc shadow. They deal with PAM, and then PAM can pick which things you want to authenticate against. And then Kerberos libraries. Alright, so I'm going to install that and hit yes. Alright, so now for my default Kerberos realm, I would want to put in my actual domain name. Now we could just skip this part here and edit the config file afterwards. It's going to be in etc krb5.conf. So the Kerberos servers for my realm would just be a DC, because that's what my domain controller is called. Now, truthfully, I may go back and just re-edit this config file manually to make sure it matches. I've got a wiki where I've written up the instructions as well, and it's just easier to make sure that the config matches exactly what I want. Yeah, I really like the new apt package manager. I like aptitude because you didn't have to remember a bunch of different ones like apt-get. Alright. So now we're going to go ahead and do a service. Samba start. It's actually on the newer Linux, it's SMBD. So we'll have to just replace that. So now we can check the status, and it should be running. Okay, so now I want to set up Winbind and Samba to start automatically when the system boots up. So I'm going to run update rc.d on Samba and tell it to start in all the defaults, and then we're going to do the same thing. That should be SMBD, and then we will do the same thing with Winbind. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go to the etc folder, and if we look inside the Kerberos config file, I've got my default realm, and the rest of that stuff actually looks pretty good. Okay, so now I can go ahead and if I was trying to join this to something, you can do a klist to see if you joined anything, and there's not any. If there were, you'd issue a kdestroy command, and that would destroy any existing credentials. But then you can do a kinit, and you can pick any user account that's valid for your domain. It's got to be a domain admin, something that can join computers to the domain. And so I'm going to say I'll use my Josh.Jones one that if I pull up the DC, you'll see it here. And if we look in the computers currently joined, you'll see Win7 client, NAS, and mail. So when we get finished here, we should see AD Linux also as a client. And this is the user account I'm going to use, and we see that it is a member of the administrators and the domain admins. Alright, so I'm going to join using Josh Jones at Cyburity.com, alright, which is essentially just the realm name. Alright, now it wants my password. And when this works, it'll give an error message about registering DNS. Oh, not here. It gives that later when I do the net ADS join. Alright, so now if I do a klist, we should see our Kerberos ticket. So we've got a valid ticket that's good for some period of time. Right? So now what we want to do is we want to go look in the etc Samba folder. Alright, so this is where the Samba config is, this main smb.conf file. So if I look in the smb.conf, it's going to be the default config file. Right? So I could just copy this config file to a .orig just to save it, the original. Right? And then I will go ahead and echo nothing into smb.conf because I want to empty it out. And then I'm going to edit that with the config that I've developed. So it's pretty simple. I'm going to paste it in, and you'll see the domain name for the site that I developed this on, and then we will just edit it. Alright, so instead of CS, because see, I'm the system administrator for the computer science department at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, we're going to change this to Cyburity. Right? And instead of the realm being cs.uh.edu, we'll change it to cyburity.com. The password server will also be cyburity.com. We can leave the rest of this blank, or the default, I mean. And then down here when we've got the ID map, right? So if you don't pick this, different computers will pick different ID ranges, ways to map the Windows SIDs, the SIDs, to UIDs. So I'm going to change this to always start them at the same number range. And this will mean that if I have, say, an Active Directory integrated FreeBSD NAS or an Active Directory integrated mail server, my Active Directory accounts, the UIDs will match across all the systems, which means file ownership will be seamless. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Now after I've saved that, I'm going to do a net ADS join user. Again, I'm going to use josh.jones, right? And it's going to want my password again. This is the one where I should see that, here we go. So it said it joined AD Linux to the domain, right? However, it says the DNS was unable to update the DNS. Now the reason is, if we go back and look at the domain controller, right? So if we go look at the DNS, let's go to Tools, DNS, alright, and let's go to the forward lookup zone here and go to my forward zone for Cyburity.com. And if I go to the properties, you'll see on the dynamic updates that it's set by default to secure only for security reasons, which means that random hosts can't update their own DNS entries. If I had changed this to non-secure and secure, then that wouldn't have failed. It should have updated its own DNS. Alright, but now if I go look in the Active Directory users and computers, and if I go look in computers, we see AD Linux. So the computer did join to the domain. Alright, so we're not finished yet though. Alright, so I want to go ahead and I need to take and stop Winbind, and then I need to do a restart on the Samba daemon. And since I've got the newer version, it's going to be SMBD, right? And I'll do a restart. And then I need to start my Winbind back. At this point, now if I do a wbinfo-u, I can see the user accounts here from Active Directory, right? The two that we looked at ahead of time, josh.jones and kyle.stanley. And see, if I look in etc password, you'll see those accounts don't exist, right? Yeah. Okay. So now we need to go to the etc folder and edit the nsswitch.conf file. This is the order in which it's going to look up the name services, right? Like user accounts, groups, hosts, right? And so I want to change this password. I want to add in Winbind. Now you'll notice that it's listed after. So if you had a local user account with the same name as one of your Windows domain controller accounts, it would use the local account because that's the first place it's going to search for a match. So then I'm going to do Winbind for the groups. Winbind, and type. Alright, that way it works for both users and groups. Alright, and now I will exit this. Now, one of the things, if I were to log in right now, if I go to the home, I don't have home directories for josh.jones or kyle.stanley. So the pluggable authentication module that we talked about earlier that allows Linux to switch out what kind of authentication measures you have, we can go edit the common session, and we can scroll down here, and we could put in here after this PAM Unix required, we can put in session required, and we can use the PAM_make homedir.so. SO is a library. So this is going to make home directory if it doesn't exist, right? And then we would set our umask, which just determines the initial permissions, to 0022, which is going to make the default permission 755, which is read, write, and execute by the owner, and read and execute by everyone else. And then we want to specify the skeleton directory, which is essentially the template that it will use when it creates the home directory. So I'm going to save that. We can go look in that Etsy skeleton folder, and if we see these here are the 3 files that are in here. So when it creates a new home directory, those are the 3 files that are going to end up there. You could customize your config files here, your bash RC, if you wanted to set up special aliases, and all your new user accounts would get those same settings. At this point, I should be able to SSH in as josh.jones at localhost, and I'm going to hit yes, and now I can log in with my Windows password, and I'm logged in, and I can see my home directory got created. It created a folder, and so the path here, this domain name and then the username, that came from, if we looked in the Etsy Samba config file that we created, here's the template for the home directory. We used home directory. This %D means the the domain name, and the %U means the username. So there you have it, Active Directory integration. Everything works just fine. This should preserve across reboots. I have set up postfix and dovecot and mail server stuff, webmail, and hooked them all in to use the same Active Directory integrated accounts with no problems. So anyway, if anyone's got any questions, they can feel free to email me at oops, I was typing the screen. If anyone's got questions, they can feel free to email me at cyburity@gmail.com, and I'd be more than willing to help.